super fun, and all about artisan cheese and more to melt your peaceful heart and toast your peaceful life. Coming to you from the Appalachian Mountains of southwestern Virginia, this is the Peaceful Heart FarmCast.
Hey, this is Scott Hall from Peaceful Heart Farm, and you are listening to the Peaceful Heart FarmCast.
Hello, everybody. Melanie Hall here. I hope you are doing well. The conversation today and every day revolves around the value of tradition, traditional life, traditional food prep and storage, traditional cooking, and of course, traditional artisan cheese. Topics discussed here are designed to create new perspectives and possibilities for how you might add the taste of tradition to your life. We are raising quail for eggs. Or are we? Maybe we're raising quail for meat. Or perhaps it is a combination of the two. That's the topic of today's podcast. Settle in and let's get cracking on figuring this out. But first, it's important for me to take some time to say welcome to each and every new listener and a heartfelt thank you and welcome back to veteran homestead-loving regulars who stop by the FarmCast every week. I would not have a show without you. And I am so excited to share with you what's going on at the farm this week. So we'll talk about some homestead life updates. I'm going to talk about, am I allergic to quail eggs? And then today's recipe is going to be quail in the Instant Pot. How about that? Now, as many of you know, that to-do list for the homestead always seems to grow and never shrink. Every day, stuff is checked off the list, and then every day, more stuff is added to the list. And one is never bored here at Peaceful Heart Farm. And there are those wonderful moments of appreciation for this creation. Just this morning, I walked outside. I was on my way to do my hour drive to the Withville Farmers Market. And I'm out there, it's barely 6 o'clock, and I looked around and I listened and I smelled and I felt the peace of our beautiful piece of God's creation. Now, Scott was standing there beside me, and we shared a moment of bliss as the day was dawning. Peace. I had a great day at the Withville Farmers Market this morning. The crowd was small, but the people were engaging. I had several lovely conversations with neighbors and visitors from across this great country. We had a small band playing and singing. It was a family, and so there was a young boy that was singing, his mom and dad. It was great. There's nothing like a small town farmers market with lots of good people. But back here on the homestead, Scott was handling the milking on his own. It takes him much longer to accomplish that morning chore without my help, but he gets it done and he does it well. His cleaning skills are exemplary. I know it's trying sometimes, probably for him with only one person bringing up the cows. Claire likes to plod along while Butter zooms ahead as if going to the races, and the rest of them kind of just scatter themselves about. It's much easier with two people, trust me. And I've talked a lot about how busy, and more busy that we are here. And in an effort to streamline the time spent with milking, the chore of milking, and to gain time for other things, we've made a couple of changes. First, we changed the schedule to once a day milking. We have filled our cheese aging storage area to capacity, and the only reason really for milking twice a day is for making cheese. Once a day milking changes the quality of the milk in a small way, but it is enough to change the cheese. It changes like the structures of the proteins. So milking twice a day is required when we're making cheese. And then the next thing that we changed was combining 2 milking sessions. So up to this point, we were doing 3. We would milk Butter by herself, And then Claire and Buttercup would be together. We have a milking machine that has 2 sets of claws on it, so we could milk them together. And then finally we had Violet and Cloud together. Well, Cloud never had a calf. So in essence, we ended up with Butter milked by herself and Violet milked by herself. And I don't know, Cloud will either not have a calf this year or it will be much later. We don't really know yet. Anyway, we are retraining Violet so she can be milked at the same time with Butter, and that is a major undertaking. There are 2 milking stanchions, and that is what allows us to milk 2 cows at once. And since her indoctrination to the stanchion, Violet has occupied the one on the left, and Cloud has been to her right in the other stanchion. And now we are trying to train Violet to the stanchion on the right. And she, like all cows, is quite distressed when anything changes in her routine. Eventually she will get the hang of it, but currently she still goes straight to the left-hand stanchion. Now the problem is Butter is always already in place there. She always wins the race to the shed. And that means that Scott has to come in and kind of urge Violet off to the right. And at this point, she complies, varying degrees of cooperation there. We've barely been doing this for a week. And when we first made the change, she tried to exit the milking shed completely. Something was not right, someone was in her spot, and she was getting out of there until everything was back to normal. And we chased her around in circles for a few days before she finally gave in and put her head in the stanchion on the right-hand side. But over time, she's gotten better and better at the new routine. And one day, she will just start doing it, and anything else asked of her will become the oddity at that point, once that becomes the new norm. Yeah. So once a routine is ingrained, cows do it nearly the same day after day after day. They're really predictable in that way. So the cows are being milked more quickly and only once a day. So we're doing only 2 sessions with the portable milker instead of 3. And the calves are getting more milk because we have more available for them since we're not saving it for cheese. And they are growing so quickly. Being bottle-fed calves, they're easy to touch and pet and hug. They constantly try to find a bottle, and so they're kind of they're not really paying so much attention to you as they are trying to find a bottle. But still, we can handle them and they don't run away. And that's important. Even though the Normandy breed is a very docile breed, they still need to be handled when young. They need to be taught to lead and so on. Now, there's not much to say about the goats and the sheep. They're out there eating grass and weeds and such. The lambs and kids are growing. They're just in fantastic shape. Scott handles the pastures very well, and there's plenty for all of the animals to graze on. So we do rotational grazing, and that makes sure that there's lots of grass out there for them. And there's a great deal of work that Scott will have to do to get the backfields prepared for them. That microburst storm from, 2-3 weeks ago, it took down at least 3 dozen trees back there, and many of them are on fences. And so that's where that to-do list starts growing. I think Scott's plan is to clear and repair each fence line as they are needed. So as he needs to take the milk cows into this area, then it's like, okay, well, I've got to repair that fence. And then if they go into another area, okay, now we've got to repair that part of the fence. So eventually it will all get done as the animals rotate through all of the paddocks one by one. So is it hot where you are? It is certainly hot here. Day after day after day of intense summer heat. And July and August are, of course, the hottest months of the summer. So 90 degrees is not unusual. And sometimes we don't have so many of them and so many in a row, but we're really getting hammered this year. And fortunately, there are also these summer thunderstorms, and occasionally we are the benefactor of, say, a 50% chance of rain. We hit the jackpot one day where the chance of rain for us was like 10%, and we got all 10% of that bit of storm cloud. The heat and the lack of consistent rain it's hard on the garden and the orchard. And as you've probably seen, time is our biggest asset here on the homestead. And to water the entire orchard takes quite a few hours. We got lots of trees out there. Now the garden takes usually at least 2 hours. Interestingly, we have drip irrigation systems. The entire orchard was set up, but over time it's non-functioning at this time. Let me just say that it's non-functioning. Most of it's in place out there, but there are leaks and breaks. And anyway, I mean, that would save time if taking the time to fix it were a higher priority on the list, right? I'm getting lots of tomatoes. In a couple of days, I'm going to start my first batch of tomato sauce. I am so excited. A lot of my veggies got overrun with weeds and bugs this year, but my tomatoes are looking really good. I've been kind of taking care of them. They haven't been fertilized as much as I would like, but they've been weeded pretty good. And I'm picking them before they are completely ripe. And I didn't really want to do that, but I would lose most of them to the raccoons if I didn't do that. We find them out there with bites and chunks out of the side of them, and they're yellow. They're not even red, so they're eating them before they're ripe. And my solution is to pick them every couple of days, and I get anything that has the slightest bit of color change towards ripening. I know it's not ideal, but it works right now. We have a trap at some point that we'll try to trap the raccoons out there, but I have shelves of tomatoes ripening in my beautiful wall of windows in the living room. Just 3 full, big, 4-foot long, 1.5-foot wide shelves that are just full of tomatoes that are ripening in that sunlight that comes in from into my living room. Now, my favorite vegetable to grow is crowder peas, or cow peas as they're sometimes called. The plants grow prolifically. Mexican bean beetles don't bother them. They require minimal amounts of fertilization, and even the hot, dry weather hasn't taken much of a toll on them. They just go. And the only pests that I've ever seen on them are the ants that are farming the aphids. So the aphids are on there, but the ants, they actually grow the aphids, but then they eat them. So I don't know. They sort of keep the population under control. At least I've never had a problem with the little buggers. So the problem is when you're picking the peas and the ants are crawling all over me and I'm slinging them around to get them off my arms. And I think sometimes I look like a scarecrow flapping around in the wind, waving my arms around and slinging ants. And they're those big black ants. And they only bite if they get trapped. So it's just like crawling on you. And anyway, arms going everywhere. And I'm getting so many peas, and they are really good. I always pick a few of the smaller sprouts, and I snap them like green beans, just a few. So I pick the cow peas when the pot is full, but before it dries out. And then, so most are just the round peas, and then there's a few of the little green sprigs in there. It's just so good. Now, in the end, as I get to the end of the harvest, I will dry some of these peas to be planted next year. But during the summer, during the growth, I pick them while they're still moist and a little bit green. And you pick them and then they put on again, and you pick them and they bloom again. So they just go on and on and on. And usually I get them canned in pint jars, and though sometimes I will have enough in one batch for a few quarts. You just open a jar and add just a small amount of baking grease in there, or not. I mean, Scott doesn't put it in there. I would put it in there, but make sure you have some hot cornbread on the side, and you have a little piece of heaven right there. Now, the last homestead topic is actually the topic of the day. What to do with the quail. So, here's the story. Am I allergic to quail eggs? That is the question. Likely the answer to that is yes. As you know, if you're a regular listener, we started raising quail so we could have the eggs. Coffee and eggs are just about the only thing we buy from the grocery store these days. I do buy other items like flour, sugar, and salt, but I get those in bulk. those items, they last a long time in storage, and so I buy larger quantities for a really good price. And I store some coffee in bulk that I don't use. It's only there for a real emergency. Like if I couldn't get coffee from the store, then we would use the other stuff. But fresh ground is what Scott prefers, and that's why it comes from the local grocery. And of course, eggs need to be fairly fresh. So raising laying chickens was the original plan, but the time that's needed to get that set up and to maintain them, that was more than we were willing to invest at the present time. Everything's going into building the creamery and developing the cheeses and all of that. So, and that's not to say that it won't happen in the future. I'm sure it will, actually. In the meantime, raising quail seemed like the next best option. They're smaller, much easier to build their shelter and to keep up with them. And the plan was to have 6 breeding sets. Now, each breeding set would have 5 hens and a rooster. So we would end up with having like 36 breeding quail. 5 hens and a rooster times 6 cages. And that, as I said, the required housing was reasonably small. And so we would have these 6 small cages, and then we would also have 1 large cage for growing out new birds. Because they really only live a couple of years, and so they have to be replaced all the time. And we would also grow out regular batches of quail for the meat. It's a fantastic meat. And as I've said, quail are just so easy to raise. Well, that was according to all of the information we looked at via YouTube. Oh, yeah, they're so easy. And in truth, we have found that to be the case. They are really easy to care for. They grow quickly. They produce eggs and meat within 8 weeks. And it seems to be the ideal situation for us at this time. So what we did is we ordered eggs in the spring, and I received them a couple months later, and that was only a couple of months ago, July. So it was in May, I guess, when I first got the eggs and put them in the incubator for the first time. There's always a waiting list for quail eggs, so if you get interested in growing the quail, get on the list early. And they're only going to get the eggs in the spring because they'll produce eggs all winter long, but they're not going to be as many eggs, and they're not going to be quite as fertile. Anyway, so we ordered 3 dozen eggs, and we actually received 40 eggs instead of 36, and 24 of those eggs hatched, and we still have 23 birds. We lost 1 to a black snake a few weeks back. It was a really small snake. It had to be, because it got through this 1/2-inch hardware cloth that the cages are made with. 1/2 inch. And I have no idea how the snake killed the bird. I mean, it had to have gotten the head in its mouth, maybe, and smothered it. I don't know. I can see no other way. And that's what snakes do, is they like swallow things whole. But the snake was less than 1/2 inch in diameter, and the bird's head had to be, I don't know, 3/4 inch, maybe an inch or more at that time. I don't know how it happened. I just know I found the snake in the cage and the bird dead. And the other birds are just running around, and they're not defending themselves. I mean, it would have been comical if it wasn't so tragic. Anyway, the bottom line is we lost 0 birds from the time that they hatched. And that is part of what I mean by how easy they are to raise, because some baby chickens, I mean, you have to be really careful with them. They seem to die within days, some of them, no matter what you do. But these quail are hardy. So you make sure they have food and water. Get the snake out of the cage. That's it. And right now we're getting 6 to 8 eggs a day at this point. And we had 2 wonderful meals of quail from the extra roosters that we raised. We had 13 roosters in that first batch and 10 hens. And so we kept 3 of the roosters and off the other 10 birds. And that made 2 really nice meals. And so we're getting 6 to 8 eggs a day. And it took 6 days to save up 47 eggs that are currently in the incubator. And the incubator is currently at day 10 of 18. So we've got 47 eggs nestled in there, and they're rocking back and forth in the automatic egg turner every couple of hours. And at day 15 of the 18, I will open the incubator, take out the egg turner, and then I close it back up. And then it does not get touched until 3 days after we hear the first bird chirping. And that can start at day 16, 17, somewhere along in there. So, and the chicks, they have enough energy to last 3 days after hatching. And some eggs will continue hatching during that 3 days. So you want to let the hatch continue on for the entire 3 days. And it's important not to disturb those hatching eggs. A sudden change in the humidity and temperature, it can seal in a baby quail that's trying to get free of the egg. Like if it's cracked the shell but it's not out, that inner membrane kind of collapses down around it and can suffocate it. So no opening the incubator until we're sure that all the eggs have hatched that are going to. Or at least, until the 3 days is up, and we have to get the birds out then because they need to get food and water at that point. And last time I closed it back up and I left it for 3 more days just to see if any more would hatch out. And we got one more, but that was it. And all in all, it was a good hatch, and I'm excited to see how our own eggs turn out. I'm suspecting we'll actually get a better hatch rate. Although 50 to 60% hatch rate is about what you can expect with quail eggs, is what I've heard anyway. And so we've got the incubator up and running, and so quail eggs are collected each day now, and they're set aside for eating. And it takes 4 quail eggs to equal 1 large chicken eggs. So basically 8 to 12 quail eggs for breakfast if you're going to have 2 or 3 eggs, along with sausage or bacon and perhaps some grits. Well, I don't eat grits, but Scott does. And he needs a stick to your ribs breakfast for all that hot, sweaty work he's doing building the creamery. So he'll have some bacon and usually 3 eggs and some other yogurt or grits, or sometimes I make him pancakes and stuff. But anyway, I loved the eggs, but it seems they didn't love me. Or maybe I loved them in my mind, but my body said, no way. When I first started eating them, I did feel a little queasy later in the day, and I chalked it up to them being like too rich. They're really tasty, but yeah, they are a little bit richer. And so I decided to eat less of them at a sitting. And no problem, right? I can always get by on fewer calories. Between the time that I first became queasy when eating them and the time I decided to eat fewer in a given meal, I actually was sick for about 12 hours. It was like, this is kind of making me queasy. And 5 or 6 days later, I'm like, well, I'm going to start eating less eggs, right? Well, in between there was this day where I got really, really sick. I mean, really sick. And it seemed obvious to me that it was something I ate. If it was a virus or something, I think it would have lasted at least 24 hours. And at this time, I assumed it was something that I had eaten the day before, not the day of. I threw out a whole salami because that was the only thing new that I had consumed. So my little sickness episode caused me to miss my farmer's market debut in Independence, Virginia, as I was still recovering from the effects of the nausea, vomiting, and diarrhea the day before. And all of that stuff stopped within 4 hours or so. So it wasn't a really long episode, but it was intense. And that leaves you pretty weak for a period of time, a little bit dehydrated and so on. And I didn't want my first day at the market to be a disaster, so I postponed that market appearance for another week. So at this time, I'm not suspecting the quail eggs so much. I think it had crossed my mind. But anyway, I was like, well, I had already decided I was going to eat fewer quail eggs. And so I only had 6. So that was like 1.5 chicken eggs amount on Tuesday. But the same thing happened again. That had happened just 5 days earlier. And it was just like glaringly obvious to me that the only thing that I was eating that I didn't normally eat was the quail eggs. Yeah. So, bummer. I was just sure it was the quail eggs, So now what? We've spent all this time, developing this whole quail operation. Well, I'm giving up eggs. I'm giving up all eggs right now. We'll still raise quail eggs, but we won't need so many because I'm not eating them. My mind right now is thinking that we will raise a lot more for meat. Chicken is a rarity in our household because we don't have any that we raise, and I don't shop much at the grocery store. We have beef and lamb and goat. And the poultry is nice, and I will sometimes pick up a rotisserie chicken while picking up eggs and coffee at the grocery store. But I think the future holds more quail for us. And that leads me to today's recipe. Instant pot quail. Now, the reason that I go for the Instant Pot rather than oven roasted is the heat. It is really hot outside, and to roast quail requires a 500-degree oven. That's right, 500 degrees. I don't even know if my oven goes that high. They're cooked a short time, but just the thought of preheating an oven to 500 degrees makes me sweat. Now, as with all Instant Pot recipes, this one's quite simple. And by the way, I actually have a Kosori, but it works the same. Instant Pot is to a multifunction pressure cooker as Xerox is to copy machines. Everybody calls them Xerox, but they're all copy machines. So everybody calls it an Instant Pot, but it's really a multifunction pressure cooker. Now, the prep time for this recipe is 12 minutes, and the cook time is 23 minutes. Another advantage to Instant Pot cooking is it's quick and easy. So what you need is 2 whole quail, 4 to 5 ounces each. You want salt. You're going to salt them to taste. You're going to pepper them to taste. You'll want a bunch of fresh thyme, a couple tablespoons of cooking oil of your choice. You'll need a half a cup of chicken broth, 3.5 ounces of bacon, chopped, a half a small onion, finely chopped, 1/8 of a teaspoon of rosemary, 1/8 of a teaspoon of thyme, and a bay leaf. All right, so basically you've got the quail, the chicken broth, bacon, and onion, and a few spices, right? So you're going to season the quail with the salt and pepper, stuff the cavity of the quail with the fresh thyme, and then you're going to put the oil in the Instant Pot and select saute. Add the bacon, the onion, the dried herbs, the bay leaf, and just for about 3 minutes you're going to kind of stir that around and saute it. Then put the quail in the pot, breast side down, and cook it for 4 to 5 minutes or until it's browned, and then flip it over to the breast side up, and then just cancel. Cancel the saute cycle. Add the broth to the pot and put the lid on, and then you're going to cook using a manual and high pressure for about 7 to 9 minutes. And then cancel if needed. If you weren't able to set your minutes, you can always just cancel it when you get to that 7 to 9 minute mark, and then do a quick release on it. Remove the lid, transfer the quail onto a plate, and then take the herb sprigs out of that cavity. Then you're going to take the liquid that's in your Instant Pot bowl and strain it. And then put it back into the Instant Pot and select saute again, and then you're going to cook it for about 3 or 4 minutes just to get that broth good and hot, maybe thicken it just a little bit. You're going to add the quail back into the broth for just a couple of minutes and, basting it with the broth or the sauce. And then, remove it from the Instant Pot, serve it with the sauce. I mean, that's really it. You're basically doing a little bit of herbs and onion and the bacon, and then browning it, put it in the Instant Pot, and then strain that broth and use that to baste your quail for a few minutes. And that is it. That's it for today's podcast. I hope you enjoyed catching up with us on the homestead. Sometimes we plan and plan and plan, and then God steps in and alters our path. Oh well, I trust him and roll with punches. I'll be having quail meat rather than quail eggs, and Scott will continue to enjoy both. So I guess I'm allergic to quail eggs. They certainly don't like me. I hope you're having fun with friends and family this summer as we continue on with the dog days. And kids will be back in school soon, and the cycle will move on to fall. Hey, I'm already ahead of myself. I'm looking forward to the fall. Summer's not my favorite season. it has its beauty and advantages, but I really like moderation. But you know what? You know what? Isn't it the moderation that gives us, or sorry, isn't it the contrast that gives us appreciation of the moderation, right? That's something to think about. And remember, don't heat up that kitchen with the oven. Use your Instant Pot. You'll be glad you did. Some people are kind of scared off by them, but once you start using it, you'll love it. You will. And if you enjoyed this podcast, please hop over to Apple Podcasts and subscribe. Give me a 5-star rating and a review. Please do reviews. That helps Apple, iTunes know to move it up, give it more prominent placement in the search results. And please share it with any friends and family. That's even more important. Share it with your friends and family who might be interested in this type of content. As always, I'm here to help you taste the traditional touch. And thank you so much for stopping by the homestead. And until next time, may God fill your life with grace and peace.